Hi everyone, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to my garden. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different. Rather than talk about one specific topic, I wanted to answer some of the questions you've been sending me. And I figure if you have that question, there's probably more folks that have the same question. So this way I can reach a larger group of you. The first thing I wanted to talk about, though, is I wanted to point out this amazing rose. I recently profiled it on my Facebook page, but I wanted to make sure everyone saw this. So this is Rosa glauca. Glauca is the Latin word for blue, and it refers to this beautiful blue foliage. Now this rose is bomb-proof. It does beautifully through our winters. It has never died back from a late frost. It blooms profusely, as you can see by these lovely little flowers, and it's probably about 10 feet tall. Now it's in an area that gets minimal amount of care. So if you're looking for a fantastic rose that's very easy care, I heartily recommend Rosa glauca. These are some of our lilac bushes, and as you can see, we had plenty of beautiful blossoms this spring, which I just love. But a lot of you have been asking me, when can I prune them? Well, the important thing that you need to know is that lilacs form next year's buds very shortly after this year's flowers have faded. So if you want to do some pruning, do them immediately after the flowers are done, so that you can hopefully not cut off next year's blooms. If you accidentally do, you should be able to get flowers the following year, so all is not lost. Many of you have been asking me questions about our hoop house, and it is one of my favorite parts of our vegetable garden. I use it year-round, and it is awesome. Now, a lot of you have been wanting to know about the materials we used and just details about the construction of it. So I wanted to let you know that even though I'm very happy to answer your questions individually, I do want you all to know that if you go to my website, susansinthegarden.com, there's a little search window that's near the upper right-hand corner of each page. And if you type in Hoop House Project as 3 words, you will find the whole process, including a video of making it, the supply list for the materials, and so on. So be sure to check that out, because this is a great way to grow year-round. Now, every time I make a video about things in our vegetable garden, you probably think I don't like birds at all, because I'm always talking about things I do to keep them away from certain crops. Well, in truth, I love birds. We really enjoy watching them, learning about them, and in particular, I love how a lot of birds are insectivores. So they help me out in the garden by eating some of the problem insects. But there are certain crops, most notably lettuce, that I need to keep the birds away from. If I did not have this bird netting on here, all you would see of this whole crop of lettuce is probably the center rib of each leaf. That's all there would be, because they love nibbling on lettuce. So I leave this cover on the crop the whole season long, because I don't need to use a floating row cover to keep insects away. I just need to keep the birds away from this crop. I also use bird netting or floating row cover over some of the small seeds that have sprouted, because birds do like to nibble on freshly sprouted seeds, and so I need to give them a little protection for a couple of weeks, and then that cover is coming off unless they need protection from certain types of insects. But yes, I really do love birds. I know it doesn't sound like I do, but you know, if you do a couple of things to keep them away from something that might be a problem, then it's a win-win for both the birds and for me. I'm frequently asked about the hoops we use to either support floating row cover or bird netting over our raised beds. Well, this is what we use. It's flexible black plastic sprinkler pipe. It's just 1/2 inch in diameter, and we had a whole bunch of it left over from a project years ago, but we always like to recycle what we have on hand. So we cut a bunch of lengths of it that we felt would be a good height for a hoop. And then if you look on the outside of this bed, you'll see a bunch of white pipes that have been clamped to the outsides of our bed. These are 3/4 inch diameter PVC pipes, and you'll notice that these hoops slip very easily into those pipes, which is great. Now, because we rotate our crops every year, we just about have every bed with pipes on the outside so that we can easily interchange where we want to plant things. We get a lot of questions about our bean arbor, and I can't blame you for asking because this is truly my favorite part of our vegetable garden. Now, on this arbor, we grow pole beans, and they grow up and over a pathway, which is really an area of the garden that doesn't get used, right? As they grow, they form this nice, lush, shady tunnel that I get to stand in and harvest the beans, because the beans tend mostly to hang down on the inside, making it very easy for me to harvest them. But what a lot of you want to know is, where did we get the trellises? Because this arbor is formed of 4 individual trellises spaced a few inches apart each. Well, we got them at a chain store here in Spokane, Washington called Fred Meyer. If you don't have one, there are other places I've seen them at, such as home centers like Home Depot and Lowe's. Now, the trellises are 7.5 feet tall, but they have spikes on the bottom that you push down into the soil to make them nice and stable, and that makes them 6.5 feet tall. They are 14 inches deep, and they are 46 inches wide, which works really well because we have 36-inch wide pathways, so that puts them a few inches into each bed on either side. I get a lot of questions from folks asking how to deal with larvae on plants. And I've got a little bit of a breeze here, but I wanted to show you this ladybug larva. You'll notice they look quite a bit different from the ladybug adults that we all know and love. But these guys, even though they look a little fearsome, are definitely an ally to have in the garden, because between the adults and the larvae, they have voracious appetites for aphids, and so you definitely want to see these guys in your garden. Now, this plant that this guy is sitting on is a currant bush, and I had some aphids on there, and I thought, oh darn, what am I going to do about them? And then a few days later, here come the ladybugs, here's the larvae, and they are wiping out the aphids, which is awesome. So if it's a plant that you can be a little bit patient with, I would recommend letting nature do what it does best. However, if you have a plant that's maybe like a cabbage family member and you have aphids on it, a very simple organic solution is to use a strong jet of water from a hose to dislodge them from the plant. Research has shown that they do not have the energy to crawl back up onto the plant after they've been given this treatment, so it's definitely worth a try. Now, when I grow cabbage family crops, I tend to cover them with either floating row cover or the tulle netting, which is also bridal veil material, because that will keep them away from the plants, and then I don't have the problem at all. But using a strong jet of water from a hose works great, or in this instance, letting nature do what it does is the way to go. Another insect problem that I have been hearing about from you a lot is how to deal with squash bugs, and especially organically. Well, at the risk of making you hate me, I've never had squash bugs, and it might be because of how I handle my squash plants, but I do know what you can do in order to prevent them. So if you either plant a squash seed in your garden directly, or you plant a small squash seedling that you've started indoors into your garden, what you want to do is immediately cover the bed with floating row cover and make sure that it stays on for about 3 weeks. What happens is that the squash bug adult very early in the spring lays eggs on the plants, and that starts the whole problem again. So what you want to do is, again, cover the bed for about 3 weeks, and from the very beginning of that plant's life, and then uncover it at that point, and you should be fine. But do keep an eye on the leaves and stems of the plants. If you see any eggs, make sure that you squash them, and certainly if you see a squash bug adult, make sure that you kill that too. Now that our spring flowering bulbs have just about finished blooming, I wanted to answer an important question that a lot of you have been asking me, and that is, when is it safe to remove the foliage from those bulbs? Because let's face it, it's really not all that attractive looking to leave it in the beds. However, there's a very important reason to leave it, and that is because those leaves are gathering energy, and in turn that energy will be stored in the bulbs and go towards next year's bloom. So that is really important. However, there is a rule of thumb that you can follow for knowing when it's safe to remove the foliage of those bulbs. So for tulips, daffodils, and hyacinths, you need to wait about 3 weeks before taking the foliage off. All other types of spring flowering bulbs, you need to wait 6 to 8 weeks before removing that foliage. And when you think about next year's bloom, that's a really good reason to be patient. I hope this little Q&A session was helpful to you. I'll see you next week, and happy gardening.